Senator from New York.
I note the absence of I ask unanimous consent that the quorum be vitiated.
Without objection, and the Senator from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I just wanted to rise today to praise the majority and minority leaders for coming together to make sure that we get our pending judicial nominees confirmed in a timely manner. Today, the Senate is back on track to do what we've always done for decades: confirm judicial nominees, the vast majority of whom are totally uncontroversial, as part of our day-to-day business. Thanks to the hard work of the leaders of both caucuses and to Chairman Leahy, who has been persistent and smart and focused on this issue, we were able to avoid having 17 cloture votes this afternoon on judicial nominees, most of whom were unopposed. 13, in fact, were supported by their Republican home state senators. While the details of the agreement have not yet been announced publicly, and they will be by Senator Leahy and Leader Reid and Senator McConnell, we know that there is an agreement, and that's a good thing. The bottom line is that I hope we can continue, at least at the same pace, when we have cleared the backlog that has existed. Let's be clear, Mr. President. This is what's doing our job is, and it's doing exactly what we have done literally for decades, nothing more, nothing less. You know, I suppose each side could point fingers at the other as to why this degenerated, but that's not the point today. The point today is that we have come to an agreement, and hopefully it will set the ball rolling on much smoother approvals of judicial nominees in the future, with less altercation, more comity, and actually filling the bench more quickly. There are more judicial vacancies now than at any time in recent history. 1 out of every 10 judgeships is empty, and as a result of these vacancies, families and businesses must wait sometimes over 2 years before their civil trial can even start. Even worse, it cost the government $1.4 billion in 2010 alone to detain inmates awaiting trial because there weren't enough federal judges to hear their cases. The agreement that we've reached to work through these judges is certainly not an attempt to jam judges through the process. In one day in 2002, we were here in the Senate. We confirmed 17 district court nominees and 1 circuit court nominee. And so, Mr. President, I'm glad that we've come to an agreement, and I want to give special thanks to my good friend, Senator Alexander of Tennessee. He and I have talked about this for a long time. I know he has talked to Senator McConnell. I have talked to Chairman Leahy and Leader Reid, and his encouragement to move us forward has been very helpful indeed. Let us talk just about district court nominees for a moment. The vast majority of Americans want us to confirm good, moderate, pragmatic judges to the U.S. district courts, exactly the nominees whom this President has put forward. After all, judges on the district court don't make law. Courts of appeals and Supreme Court have a little more latitude depending on the case. And look, I've said it time and time again, I'll say it again. The Senate has an obligation to take a hard look at the President's judicial nominees. My view remains that ideology does matter. Every senator here has the right to make sure that a President's judicial nominees are within the mainstream. And the definitions of mainstream sometimes differ. We know that. There will always be nominees, especially to the courts of appeals, about whom we'll disagree. There will even be those whom some of us view as so extreme, on either side, that we will refuse to give our consent to holding an up or down vote. But there's a hard look, and then there's purposeful delay, and we have to avoid that by either party at all costs. We need to get the process moving again. And when nominees come out of the Judiciary Committee unanimously or by an overwhelming bipartisan vote, there's no reason they can't be approved on the floor a few days later. We've come together today. I know we can continue in the future to agree to confirm qualified judges without further obstruction, without furthering the view it's my way or the highway, and I'd like to mention one specific way I think we can move forward on judicial confirmations in a meaningful and useful way. In the past, we've cleared the calendar of nominees on whom there's a consensus before going out for recess. Lately, we haven't done that. As a result, there were 20 nominees who did not get confirmed before last August and 10 from December. I hope that, wherever we are at the end of the summer, we can agree to confirm consensus nominees, those who got unanimous support or close to it, as we always have in the past, and fulfill our obligation to the third branch of government. And one other point, Mr. President. Today, this morning, we passed a highway bill overwhelmingly. It was led by Senator Boxer, one of the most liberal members of this body, Senator Inhofe, one of the most conservative. This afternoon, we're going to hear an announcement of specifics of an agreement to move judges forward. Tomorrow, we will be working on a jobs bill that, while there are differences in the specifics, has broad bipartisan support and consensus. Perhaps, Mr. President, an idea of a moment of greater comity that we've seen this week is not just momentary, but will last on into the future. The lesson is that the American people teach us is they don't want obstruction, particularly for its own sake. They understand that compromises have to be made in a legislative body, that it can't be my way or the highway. And unfortunately, all too often in the past year, we have seen too much of that attitude. The fact that we are batting 3 for 3 this week in terms of important issues, a highway bill, judicial nominees, and an IPO bill, with broad bipartisan consensus, hopefully augurs well for the future. Perhaps the era of obstruction and confrontation has passed its high water mark. Perhaps it is now politically damaging to block things for its own sake or because you didn't get 100% of what you wanted. Perhaps a new era of more bipartisan consensus and more accomplishment for the American people to deal with our problems is upon us. I hope and pray it is so. And with that, let me yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
As this quorum call continues on the Senate floor, the Senate a short time ago approved the $109 billion transportation bill. That vote was 74 to 22. Current funding was set to expire at the end of the month. The measure now heads to the House for their consideration. House Speaker Boehner has already indicated a willingness to take up the Senate's bill when they return from their week-long break. We were expecting debate on the first of 17 judicial nominations, beginning with Justice Gina Groh, who's nominated to become a U.S. District Judge for the Northern District of West Virginia. A procedural vote related to her nomination was set for this afternoon. Well, earlier today, Majority Leader Reid came to the floor to announce that an agreement had been reached on all 17 nominations. The story in The Hill this afternoon has some of those details, saying that Senate leaders announced that they have reached an agreement on a group of the president's nominees. Majority Leader Reid canceled those cloture votes on the nominees, saying that he had reached the agreement with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Senator Reid did not share details of the agreement, but he said that both leaders would explain it to their caucuses within the next hour. The announcement came after several days of partisan bickering over the confirmation votes, many of which Republicans have sought to block in retribution for President Obama's recess appointments in January. Reid said that he set up the votes for this afternoon to prove that Republicans were blocking the nominees to embarrass President Obama.
West Virginia.
Mr. President, I ask the order of the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection, and the senator from West Virginia is recognized.
I thank the presiding officer, and I want to point out, and I'm in this chamber together with my colleague, Senator Joe Manchin, who has just as much interest in all of this as I do, and feels the happiness from a wonderful event which is going to be happening, we hope, tomorrow in West Virginia, which will not necessarily be of moment to most people around the country or even in this body, but is an enormous moment to the people of West Virginia because it's been a long festering problem which we believe has been solved and which we believe is going to be ratified tomorrow. So what am I talking about? Tomorrow, the retirees at Century Aluminum in Ravenswood, West Virginia, hopefully are going to ratify a decision which has been reached by the steelworkers, led by a local heroine, an icon of Appalachia, and I really mean that, Karen Groh, who has stood out all night, you know, by the roadside and in protesting, because back in 2009, Century Aluminum, and aluminum, you know, is a volatile industry, but it's very much of an up industry now. They simply shut down back in 2009, and they just hundreds of jobs and hundreds of retirees and their families were just sort of cut out and cut off. Periods of negotiation went on with Century Aluminum under particular management then, but it just wasn't going anywhere. There wasn't really a lot of goodwill that I was able to detect. But then comes the kind of change that you really want to see. And you start with really good people, good workers. It's a hard job. Pays pretty good wages, good benefits, not defined benefits in terms of health care, but VIVA benefits, which aren't as good, but which are benefits nevertheless, and this is for retirees. And they're really good people, and they're located in a rural county in West Virginia, which is kind of the heartland of West Virginia, and where a lot of good people come from, and they tend to work very hard and be very, very wonderful. So what these men and women have always wanted is simply to be treated fairly. And in the world of, you know, big corporations and decisions which are made from faraway places by corporate leaders, it doesn't necessarily work that way, that the people on the line are out in the cold without benefits, without health care at all. There they are, picketing or just being miserable, and the world pays little attention because there's not a lot of progress which is made, so then their attention sort of pulls away from it. But not if you're under the leadership of Karen Groh, who is the local union leader there. And she is a fantastic woman that brings not only a ferocity. She went to a corporate meeting, Mr. President, and you will enjoy this because I know the presiding officer very well, in a T-shirt which was sort of the hands of the corporation with blood dripping right off, and it was a stockholders meeting. And she's so good that people sort of respected her for that rather than resented her for that. But she's a really strong, classic Appalachian person who happens to be a very, very strong union leader. So what happened was that there was new management at Century Aluminum. And Karen Groh, the state has been extraordinarily helpful on this, this legislature putting up a lot of money over a period of 10 years. And what should be able to happen is that Century Aluminum opens up again, people go back to work, but then the big enchilada would be if the Ravenswood plant itself, the old Kaiser plant, would open up, for which there's a purpose, a real purpose. And they reminisce in West Virginia about when Henry Kaiser, who obviously built that plant many, many years ago, would go through the plant shaking hands with workers, knowing their names, you see, sort of a different era, and an extraordinarily good man. So Senator Manchin and I want this situation to have worked out, and we both worked very hard on it. And actually, the parties weren't that far apart, but what made them not that far apart were the issues were complicated, but the will to have a settlement, the will to settle, was what predominated. And so each side didn't really get exactly what they wanted, but each side, in a sophisticated, nuanced way, understood that there were very high stakes for losing everything, and very high stakes, including a lot of money from the West Virginia legislature over 10 years. The stakes for winning, for settling, were extraordinary. And everybody rose to the occasion. I mean, this could have never happened without the leadership of Karen Gorell and her particular type of leadership, which I found wonderful, just refreshing. I've been out there many times over the years because Century Aluminum has had a lot of problems. I'm sure Senator Manchin has too. But now I think I'm praying and hoping that they're going to ratify this agreement tomorrow. And if that is so, I'm not sure that the news will reach Baltimore. I'm certain that it won't reach Vancouver, but it will reach all over West Virginia, because it will be an example of labor and management with a good corporate leadership and good union leadership coming together at precisely the right moment after a tremendous amount of strain and stress and anger to come together. So I conclude my statement just praying, really, that the retirees will do what I think they're going to do tomorrow, and I encourage them to do that, is to accept the agreement which has been agreed to by their union and by Century Aluminum. And if that happens, whether they know about it in Vancouver or not doesn't really interest me very much. They'll know about it in West Virginia, and that I care about. I thank the presiding, the President.
The Senator from West Virginia.
Mr. President, thank you. I also rise in support with my colleague, Senator Rockefeller, and I want to say what a job he has done. Both of us have had the honor of serving our great state as governors. And as every governor and every legislator knows, you fight for every job you can create, and you fight like the Dickens to save every job you have. As the Senator said, he has been fighting these battles for many, many years. I was in the legislature when he was our governor, and we fought him side by side then. And then when I became governor, he was the senator in Washington, and he fought with me on every job that we created and every job that we saved. And now here we are again side by side fighting. Ravenswood in Jackson County is a very unique place. Ripley and all the little surrounding towns, you have about 22,000 people that live in that surrounding area, 4,200 people in Ravenswood, 3,000 in Ripley. You can tell how that's the lifeblood, truly the lifeblood of a community. Lucy Harbert is the mayor, and Lucy is dogmatic. She just stays in there. Karen Gorell is unbelievable, but you have women and men there that are fighting basically for what was promised to them, but fighting for survival. I think the big story here is that in 2009, the plant closed, as the Senator had said. 2010, all the employees were told that all of their health care benefits that had been promised to them and negotiated in good faith was gone. All gone by the stroke of a pen, and the courts upheld it. Lo and behold, we have a new management team, Mike Bless, and you're talking about Monterey, California. Clear out in Monterey, California. And these people came in and they saw what we had. They saw the fabric of this town and the fortitude of these people. And so you had management that says, we need to do something. So they started working, and Karen Gorell, and they just never let up. They were dogmatic from day one. And all they're saying, we want fairness. We want to be treated fair. We want what we were promised. So everyone made considerations here. And what we have coming up with a vote tomorrow, as the Senator had said, there'll be a vote on the retirees to accept the proposal that they've been negotiating, which I am very hopeful, and I know the Senator is too, that that'll be passed tomorrow. That's the first step in the right direction. The state has entered into it as a partnership also. And with the state, they're going to work out some power contracts and things of this sort, and how important our power prices are, how important that coal and the power that coal produces at affordable prices to make it competitive. Without that, we would be dead in the water, if you will. So there's so many promising things going on, but when you see a community come together, Governor Earl Ray Tomblin, our dear friend, worked very hard in the legislature, but all of us. This is not a story you see today in America that much. In 2009, the plant closed. Over 600 people lost their job. 600 people in a little town of 4,200 people. Now you have a chance to at least get 400 or 500 back on the job. We haven't seen that turnaround too much. So you can imagine why the Senator Rockefeller and I are so excited. And we're just so, I think more than anything, so proud that we represent a state that has so much resilience. And they've stuck together here. So our hat is off from the corporate end to the union end to people working together from the community. And I need to say that the president of the Steelworkers, Leo Gerard, Leo has just been a rock. And Leo gets right in. The Steelworkers stood behind their retirees. They stood behind it, and they wouldn't take anything less than the retirees being treated fair. That really brought everybody to the table and kind of gave us the glue that it took. And with Senator Rockefeller, as persuasion as you've known him for many years here, his ability to get involved and persuade people to sit down and do the right thing, and all of us really behind this effort, it came to fruition. Today, West Virginia is a brighter spot. Ravenswood is a brighter place. The hopes are up again. People are enthusiastic. You can see that they got a little skip in their step, and that means an awful lot. And these are the hardest working people. They don't ask for a whole lot, just an opportunity to take care of themselves and their family. That's what they've done. So to Lucy Harbert, to Karen Gorell, to Mike Bless, to Leo Gerard, especially to Senator Rockefeller and our entire delegation for what they've done, I think that everyone is extremely pleased. And tomorrow, we know that that'll be a successful vote. We'll move on. That plant is going to, we're going to show the rest of the country that we can compete with anybody in the world. I know in Maryland you feel the same way, and you all have been able to. And we're going to work together on this, and we're going to start rebuilding America one job at a time. This is 400 jobs at one time. So with that, I'd say thank you to all of the good people in West Virginia that made this happen. Senator Rockefeller, thank you for your leadership over the many years. I've been very honored to work with you, and you know that, and you've been a tremendous mentor. And we will continue to work together for many years. So with that, I say thank you, and with that, I yield the floor and notice the absence of a quorum.
The clerk would call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Well, after weeks of deliberation, the Senate earlier today passed the two-year $109 billion transportation bill. The vote was 72 to 24. 50 Democrats, 2 independents, and 22 Republicans voted aye, and 22 nay votes came from Republicans. A Hill story today reflects what's next for the measure. It says the bipartisan 74 to 22 vote puts pressure on Speaker Boehner and the House to either pass a transportation bill of their own or take up the Senate-approved version of the measure ahead of a March 31st deadline for the expiration of current highway funding. Speaker Boehner's favored transportation bill is a 5-year, $260 billion measure that would pay for infrastructure projects with revenue from new domestic oil and gas drilling. His party's been divided on the measure, and the Speaker has suggested he could move to the Senate bill if he can't win over his conference. Further down, the story says Majority Leader Reid called this morning for Speaker Boehner to act quickly on the bill, and the wide margin of the final Senate vote to approve the legislation might increase pressure on the House to act quickly on the transportation bill when it comes over from the upper chamber.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as I have for the last 2 years since the health care law was signed by the President, to give a doctor's second opinion about the health care law. And I do this week after week because we need to recall that it was Nancy Pelosi, then Speaker of the House, who famously said that Congress had to first pass President Obama's health care bill to find out what was in it. It's now been 2 years. We continue to find out more and more what is in the law as people read it. And even this morning, the Wall Street Journal had a story about the upcoming 2-year anniversary and, of course, the Supreme Court hearings, which will begin in a little over a week, about whether or not this health care law is constitutional. I believe it is not, but the 3 days are being devoted to that discussion. And that Wall Street Journal article today shows a poll of from the time that this health care law was passed all the way through today, and as of today, the health care law is still more unpopular than it is popular. More people are opposed to the health care law even 2 years after it was passed than are supportive of it. Interestingly, other studies of the American populace show that as more people know more about the health care law, they actually are less likely to support it, and people who talk to a health care provider, a nurse or a doctor or a therapist, is even less likely to be supportive of the health care law. And the reason is because as more people learn about the health care law, the more they learn about it, the more they don't like it. And so much of this specifically relates to the mandate that everyone in the country is going to be obligated to buy a government-approved product. And that's the crux of the discussion and the debate that will be held within the Supreme Court in the weeks ahead, and then a decision to come within the next couple of months. And it's interesting as one goes through the process of how this law was passed. It was party line vote, middle of the night votes, closed-door sessions, in spite of the President saying all deliberations and discussions would be on C-SPAN, that the American people were saying, no, do not pass this, but in spite of the objections of people all across the country, this bill was crammed through the House and the Senate and signed by the President at a time when people said, this isn't going to give us what we want. And what we want is care that we need from a doctor that we want at a price that we can afford. The President made lots of speeches and lots of promises to try to let the public know that he was listening to them, but he wasn't listening to the public, wasn't listening to this side of the aisle. And that's why this health care law actually, it fails patients. It fails providers, the nurses and the doctors who take care of those patients, and it fails the American taxpayers. I remember the President saying, if you like your plan, you can keep it. And he said, even when he was running for President, he said, you will not have to change plans. He said, for those who have insurance now, nothing will change under the Obama plan except that you will pay less. That's what he said. But yet I went to a town hall meeting in Wyoming, as I go home to Wyoming every weekend and visit with people, and you ask this group of, I don't know, 100 citizens, how many of you under that President's health care plan believe you're actually going to pay more? Every hand goes up. Every one. Yet the President said that you'd save $2,500 per family. The American people haven't seen that. So they listen to the President's promises and they say, I'm not sure if I can believe what he has to say. The President talked about protecting Medicare. He did that in an address to Congress in 2009, and yet with the health care law, they took $500 billion away from Medicare, not to save Medicare, not to strengthen Medicare, but to start a whole new government program for other people. So when I talk to seniors, they have great concerns about the way that Medicare has been handled in this health care law. Specifically, their concern is they're not going to be able to find a doctor to take care of them. And when I talk to doctors at home in Wyoming, and I practiced medicine for 25 years, what I hear and what I see is that for patients, and these doctors, their offices are all full. I mean, in terms of the health care law, I think it failed in helping us have more doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners and physician assistants. But when I talk to them, they say, you know what, patients that I've taken care of for years and who are on Medicare, continue to take care of them. Patients who are turning Medicare age, continue to take care of them. But in terms of someone who may move to a town or someone whose doctor may retire, it is getting harder and harder for patients on Medicare to find doctors to take care of them. And a lot of it has to do with the concerns about reimbursement, the so-called doc fix that is part of the debate that recently was extended with payroll tax holiday legislation. But there's very little certainty that comes out of Congress, and doctors look at that and say, how can I make decisions about my practice and my life when I don't know if they're going to cut Medicare fees by 27 or 30% at the end of the year. They faced a similar situation at the end of last year. They faced a similar situation just at the end of February. So it's not a surprise that doctors are more and more reluctant to accept new Medicare patients when their offices are already full with patients. So we look at all of this and say, is it a surprise that this health care law is as unpopular as it is? The President said this will not add one dime to our deficits. Add not a dime to our deficits. We have another budget this year, another deficit looking at $1 trillion. The CBO report came out yesterday talking about greater money being spent that had been anticipated, higher deficit. But the President's promise, he said, I will not sign a health care plan that adds one dime to our deficits, either now, he said, or any time in the future, period. But if you take a look at an honest accounting of the health care law, it is going to find that this will increase the deficit by hundreds of billions of dollars in the first 10 years alone, and much higher than that beyond that. You know, I remember listening to the debates, and here we are in another presidential year, the debates in 2008, when President Obama, who was then a senator, a member of this body, and Hillary Clinton, also a senator, a member of this body, were debating what they saw as the future for health care. At the time, candidate Obama opposed a mandate to buy insurance, a mandate that is now part of, and actually many call the linchpin of this health care law, the thing that's going to be discussed and debated in the Supreme Court, the thing that the court is going to rule on whether it's constitutional or not. It is at the heart of President Obama's health care law. He, of course, opposed it when he was a candidate, and he actually made it one of the hallmarks of his primary campaign against then Senator Clinton, his opposition to the mandate. So people scratch their head and say, what is he really for? What does he stand for? The President, when he was senator, claimed that penalizing people for not buying health insurance was like, and I will quote him, it was like, he said, solving homelessness by mandating everyone buy a house. That was his words, talking about the impact of a mandate. So here we are now, 2 years later. 3/4 of Americans believe it's unconstitutional for this body, for Congress, and for any president to sign something that mandates that they buy a government-approved product. Don't know what the Supreme Court's going to do, but in fact, the American people are opposed, significantly opposed, to the key component of the President's health care law. The President also said we won't raise any of your taxes, and yet there's a list of taxes that have been raised as a result of this health care law. So it's not surprising that 2 years later there are more people opposed to the health care law than support it. You know, you kind of think about the President and the statements that he's made and the statements made on the other side of the aisle in the run-up of the health care law, and it's not a surprise that then 2 years later people are saying, that's not what happened. I remember the discussions and debates on this floor about the small businesses and the expenses that this was going to place on our small businesses. And the President said 4 million small businesses may be eligible for tax credits. The key word, of course, there was may. In fact, the IRS spent $1 million in taxpayer money to pay to mail millions and millions of postcards to small businesses promoting the so-called tax credit. But Treasury Department's Inspector General, here we are 2 years later, recently testified that the volume of credit claims has been lower than expected. Lower than the Democrats promised, lower than the President talked about, but not lower than people that actually read the bill, read the law, thought would occur because of the requirements, what would need to do to apply, what the incentives were, what the consequences were. And they found out of these 4 million promised small businesses to get help, the Treasury Department's Inspector General says only 309,000 firms have received the credit. 7% of the 4 million firms that the administration and the Democrats in the Senate said would receive the tax credits. So when people look at that and say, did they really help me? The answer is no. And that's why when I ask the second question at a town hall meeting, not the first, of course, which is, do you think you'll end up paying more under the Obama health care law, the one that promised that you'd pay $2,500 less? All the hands go up. They believe they were going to pay more. And then the second question is, do you believe that the availability and quality of your care under the Obama health care law is going to go down? Go down. Nobody wants that for themselves or their parents or their kids. How many of you believe that it's going to go down? Everyone raises their hand. They all believe that they will receive less available, less quality, less timely care than they were able to achieve before the health care law was passed. And that's why I come to the floor each and every week with a doctor's second opinion about the health care law, because each and every week there is something new that has been found or a new regulation that comes out, because let's not forget, in this lengthy health care law, lengthy, heavy health care law, 1,700 times it says that the Secretary of Health and Human Services will write rules and regulations really describing what the law says. So when you take a very small part of the law, 4 or 6 pages relating to accountable care organizations, and come out with 400 pages of regulations about accountable care organizations, even those places that the President holds up as models of where it works well, places like the Mayo Clinic or the Utah healthcare system or Geisinger in Pennsylvania, many of those who say we cannot comply with all of these rules and regulations that are now coming out from the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And every week a new series of rules and regulations comes out, a new series of mandates, and doctors and nurses are finding that they're spending less time with patients and more time with paper, and it is hurting the job creators of the country. They don't know what it's going to cost them, but they know it's going to cost more. The incentives and the consequences within the law are not those that are going to encourage businesses to continue to provide health insurance. I believe it's going to result in more and more people being dumped by their employers onto a different system with a significant expense to taxpayers around the country. And that's why, Mr. President, I come to the floor week after week to talk about this health care law and say that it's bad for patients, it's bad for the providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of those patients, and it's going to be terrible for taxpayers. And that's why I believe that we need to repeal and replace this terrible broken health care law with something that is actually patient-centered, which puts the patient at the center of the discussion. It's not government-centered, not insurance company-centered, but patient-centered. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
As we wait for another senator to come to the floor to speak before the mic, this afternoon, senators were set to hold procedural votes on judicial nominees. Senate lawmakers reached agreement on those nominees earlier today, and according to the Hill newspaper, under the agreement, the Senate will put 14 of those 17 judicial nominations up for a vote by May 7th at a pace of 2 per week. That's according to a Senate Democratic aide. That agreement also apparently includes moving to the House's jobs bill fairly quickly. The announcement came after several days of partisan bickering over the confirmation votes, which many Republicans have sought to block in retribution for President Obama's recess appointments in January. Senators offering general speeches until we hear otherwise on the Senate floor. After earlier today passing that 2-year transportation bill, the vote was 72 to 24. 22 of the 24 no votes came from Republicans. That bill may now go on to the House. British Prime Minister David Cameron is here in Washington for meetings with President Obama. Last night, the two attended a college basketball game. Earlier today, the Prime Minister and his wife were received at the White House. President Obama and Prime Minister Cameron held a joint news conference at the White House just a few hours ago. And later tonight, there will be a state dinner in honor of the Prime Minister. Entertainment tonight will be provided by Grammy winner John Legend and Mumford & Sons. It's a British folk rock band. We will have live coverage of the arrivals and all the guests and toasts from both leaders. cspan.org will be streaming the guest arrivals in their entirety, and that's today starting at about 6:15 Eastern on our companion network, C-SPAN. Well, having completed work on the transportation bill earlier today, senators are offering general speeches now. Earlier, we'd expected work on judicial nominations. That's what we were told going into the session. An apparent agreement has been reached to spread out those deliberations on those nominations, with a vote to come on 14 of 17 of those nominations by May 7th. We are still expecting further clarification on that later today. A part of the deal also apparently includes moving on to the House's jobs bill fairly quickly. We have also learned that Senate Democrats have dropped plans to move their own legislation easing securities regulations for smaller businesses as part of an effort to encourage job creation. That could be next on the Senate's agenda. In agreeing to take up the House's bill, Majority Leader Reid is likely to see a quick final passage here in the Senate as Congress continues seeking bills that indicate a work promoting business growth and jobs. According to CQ, Majority Leader Reid said yesterday the Senate would vote on the House bill, which is touted by supporters as a jobs measure rather than taking up a Democratic alternative that he earlier said the Senate would consider. The House last week passed the bill intended to ease access to capital for small businesses and allowed them to more easily launch into initial public offerings with broad bipartisan support, and President Obama has said that he would sign it into law. General speeches on the Senate floor. Senators right now in a quorum call. Earlier today, they passed the two-year transportation bill. The vote was 72 to 24. 22 of the 24 no votes came from Republicans. British Prime Minister David Cameron here in Washington for meetings with President Obama. Earlier today, the Prime Minister and his wife were received at the White House. President Obama and Prime Minister Cameron held a joint news conference at the White House at about 12:30. Later tonight, there will be a state dinner at the White House in honor of the Prime Minister. The entertainment tonight will be provided by Grammy winner John Legend and Mumford & Sons. It's a British folk rock band. We will have live coverage of the arrivals of all the guests and toasts from both leaders. You can see that on cspan.org. Also, that'll get underway at about 6:15 Eastern on our companion network, C-SPAN.
Thank you.